So next year, you can buy 330 over 4. I'm not going to guess. So if you were someone who's measuring their wealth in number of gallons of gas they could buy, you had 100 now, but next year you're going to be able to buy 82 and a half. That means your real return is 82 and a half divided by 100 minus 1, negative 17.5%. So you essentially lost, despite having a 10% nominal return, you lost 17.5% of your wealth in real terms. So our general equation, this is also known as the Fisher equation, 1 plus the nominal return is equal to 1 plus real return times 1 plus inflation rate. This is also known as the Fisher equation. Sometimes you're going to see that Fisher equation. Nominal return is approximately the real return plus inflation. Well, in this day and age of very cheap computing, that is not necessary. This is approximate. When the real return on inflation is relatively low, that approximation is pretty accurate. But in the case of high inflation like that, for example, we went from $3 to $4. That is at 33.3333% inflation. So if, in fact, this will also imply nominal is approximately, or real is approximately nominal minus pi. So if pi is 33%, this would imply that R is approximately negative 23.33%. But we just calculate the actual real return, the rate of change of how I view my wealth. It was 17 and a half. So it's a big approximation error. That happens because approximation is good only for small levels of real and inflation rate. And we could rewrite, let me write it in red. Nominal is 1 plus real times 1 plus inflation, the whole thing minus 1, or real is you could also calculate inflation. It's just different way of calculating it. Now, we have bonds called Treasury inflation protected securities, affectionately known as TIPS. These are securities that first kind of came out in mid to late 70s, 1970s. The purpose was to protect bond investors against inflation. If you know anything about the near history, 1970s was interesting. In fact, an Arab-Israel conflict was kind of the trigger for that. Back in 1973, this was, I think, the third Arab-Israel war. There was a surprise attack by Syria and Egypt on Israel. Syria was about, Israel was about to go down. U.S. came in, helped them out. It's known as the Six-Day War, or in Israel, it's known as the Yom Kippur War, because it started on Yom Kippur, which is the traditional Day of Atonement for people of Jewish faith, and it lasted 6 days. That's why the names of the war. After Arabs lost the war, uh, the Arabic countries in Muslim countries in general, in OPEC, decided they're going to do an embargo, oil embargo against the U.S. That means they're not going to sell oil to U.S. The energy needs of 1970s were a lot more oil dependent. I'm not talking about just cars. I'm talking about everything. Okay, and most of heating was based on oil. There was very little electricity. Natural gas was kind of a side product of a lot of oil fields, and nobody ever wanted it. It's not like now. This overnight, the oil prices went up from $3 a barrel to $10 a barrel. I mean, it's huge. It's right now, before this whole thing started, oil prices were around 75 or so, depending upon the grade of oil. And if it's the Saudi oil, which is known as the sweet, I don't know why, versus Brent sea oil, uh, it's like going from $75 to 250. Okay, that's what imply if this thing lasts, gas prices are going to go from $3 a gallon to $10 a gallon, roughly speaking. It's not proportional because of the fixed rate of taxes, but it's going to be high. I mean, it's not going to affect me much. I live half a mile away. I walk to work every day. And I don't think I would visit my girlfriend too much. She lives in Frankfurt. She's worth it at $3, not at $10. No, thank you. Well, everything has a price, right? Maybe I'll visit her one third less often. I gotta eat, man. Come on. I got two kids in college, and one of whose loans I'm gonna start paying in about a month. The government doesn't say, "Oh, by the way, you can pay me less now." I wish they did. If I don't, my credit score is gonna go down even more. They said, "Okay, let's do something." For example, a standard bond is like this. Let's assume a face value of $1,000, a yield of 4%. For simplicity, assume there's one coupon every year. Every year, I'm going to pay you $40 in coupon. I'm going to wait 30 years. If it's a 30-year bond, 30 years from now, I'll pay you another $1,000. I don't particularly care what the rate of inflation was in the meantime. That's your problem. You're taking that risk. But if you're concerned about future inflation, you're going to demand these kinds of securities less. Obviously, U.S. government, just like most governments, have debt. They have to refinance that. They came up with a security that kind of alleviates those fears. They pretty much said, okay, I'm going to start you with a face value now, 1,000, and I want to give you, let's say, 2% real return, and and let's say first year inflation was 10%. First, I'm going to index the face value. F0 times 1 plus pi 1. So that's 1,000 times 1 plus 10%. That makes $1,100. Then your first coupon is going to be calculated on that. F1 times R, which is going to yield you $22. If inflation were to be zero, you would have gotten 20. So your coupon payments are indexed to inflation. Now let's say second year, something happened, prices went up by 50%. I mean, as a US citizen, you probably think, what? Everything goes up by 50%? Well, I'm going to give you example of my prepubescent adolescence and most of my life until the age about 40. I lived in a country, or my home country, had an average inflation of about 45% a year. Back when I first started working in Turkey after my grad school in Boston, my monthly salary was 1 billion Turkish liras. In 2003, when I came back to Kentucky, I was making 15 billion Turkish liras. Some of that were raises because, I was doing well, but quite a bit of it was I wasn't making 15 times as much. Probably in dollar terms, I was making about double, which is not bad, but I wasn't that good that they paid me 15 times more.